Yeah, I mean, do we want to get into some of our because or I'm dithering between going between where we think support the stuff versus what Canada's also doing, but I don't know what your
Hmm.
instincts are. Um,
Well, yeah, I mean, we can respond to this. I mean, I think maybe if we could play the clip
yeah,
from MR to get us to start on this, because this is this is not a small issue, and I don't think it's worthwhile to be a coward about it and not say what you think. I will say that at least for myself, I think I've been pretty consistent on my opinions on these things, and we're going to play a clip here of Michael and Matt from a little while ago, just to say that remember that like the way that we all worked on these things together, we were always talking back and forth with each other about our opinions on these things. And, this was a position that I think, we sort of came together, and I sort of still stand with. And I just wanted to play it just to show that like this is how we felt for a long time on this.
yeah. This is from 2019 August.
Economics, but like the gun rights thing is like something that they're just allowed to talk about.
I
Do you
think that
understand what I'm saying? Or
not really. I mean, I think I'll give you just my 2 second snapshot on guns, and one is I liked what Jamie said yesterday, that if you have a conversation that because there's a big problem, right? Because a lot of gun control conversations don't take on the gun industry as an industry, as a capital I industry that is a danger to U.S. public health and global public health.
Yeah.
Actually, the global small arms industry is one of the greatest threats on the planet. And then you do get into this liberal stuff, which I do think is just frankly counterproductive. Look, when I see some, dumb schmuck walking into a Starbucks with like, paramilitary gear on, of course, make fun of him. He's an idiot. But the broader sort of like, guns, I do think that that is liberal snobbery that is incredibly counterproductive and dumb. And I have no interest in playing that kind of cultural politics. I do have an interest in going after the NRA and the gun industry as a pernicious, dangerous, corrupted industry, right? And then the second thing I would say, the other two quick things, is that it's very difficult because if you really want to take care of guns, you got to do something extremely radical, which I'm not sure that's where I'd want to spend political capital, frankly. And number three,
yeah, exactly.
the way a lot of gun measures are implemented, and I'm not talking about really basics. Of course, you can do background check. There's all sorts of stuff you can do that's a no-brainer, and I'm not arguing against.
You can stop the manufacture of a lot of these things.
That's the issue, is the manufacture. But on the other hand, I don't want to take. I think a rhetoric of taking away, people's shotguns or whatever is ridiculous. And I also would say that that is not a myth. The origins of stop and frisk in New York City is a anti-gun program, which, by the way, had some efficacy. I mean, New York there's a lot of guns, but but that is that is a completely racist and racialized policy. So people need to be extremely thoughtful about what they're actually advocating for and who's going to get policed as a result.
And I mean, I think Michael really says it perfectly there, and we'll expand on it obviously. But like, that last bit I think is really important, is to start thinking about who will be policed by what you're suggesting and what those consequences will be. I think this is just such a big difference, for example, between your mainstream liberal and a socialist perspective on these things, right? Like dropping even what the subject is, right, which is guns, where liberals are wanting to focus on the personal level, on the punitive level, versus on the level of the manufacturers and the corporations that profit from this, right? I think if you're serious about these things, then going at manufacturers, going after sellers, is a much more viable path, than going after people. I'll say this time and time again. I know this is the case across the country, but I'll just speak from experience here in Texas. People own firearms, and notably, especially in rural parts of the country, people of color own firearms. And if you want to embolden a bunch of Bubba sheriffs to have another excuse to harass people, we see what people already face when they have legal gun ownership in this country of police. If you want to give them an excuse to come after people, you're playing a very, very, very dangerous game. Now, there's plenty of stuff. I mean, frankly, I'm all for background checks. I think that that's very reasonable. I would prefer to see less magazine capacity magazines being produced. I do think that some of those will be limited in what if they're going to stop the spectacle of the horror. But I don't see like a very compelling reason to to be against that necessarily. Um, the AR-15 in particular, it's a gun I very much dislike. Everything from what it's used for to the aesthetics of it personally. I'm somebody who's not allergic to weapons particularly. I love older shotguns and handguns and things like that. The AR-15 truly does represent a very psychotic break and a militarization of society. That being said, I don't know if you were to ban all in existence or do a buyback program, that being very beneficial or even feasible. Because remember, the AR-15 is used because it is the most popular gun in this country, which means it's one of the most accessible weapons in this country. And yeah, I mean, I'm fine with focusing on the manufacturer there, but there's a reason that it's the first one that's used, because the really scary reality is that if you were to successfully ban one of those, there are plenty of other weapons out there that are much more harmful and deadly than the AR-15, that I just can't imagine the market for those guns not increasing. So unless you were to go all the way up from the AR-15, again, and I don't know if I would even necessarily support that. I'm just saying on a level of efficacy, I would be worried about, what would then be the next most popular gun, because the really difficult thing about all of this, in my opinion, is that we have gotten really, really good in this society, because it's a sick society. It's a warlike society of creating weapons of war. And at a certain point, when you're trying to focus on technology itself, it's not tremendously complicated to turn a kind of everyday weapon into a very, very powerful, fast firing weapon. Right now, I do think that a lot of these guys, as I said to Matt the other day, the people who are doing these kind of horrific shootings aren't necessarily the types who would be able to, tinker and manufacture on their own these kind of weapons. So yeah, I think that there's definitely an argument that something like that might reduce the severity of these kind of shootings. But I just think that you start to get into a tricky place when you start focusing on the technology that it's just out there. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'm of a couple minds. So like, Trudeau is talking about a mandatory buyback that basically says, like, if you want to keep your assault weapon, it's going to be inoperable in some fashion. I don't know if that's going after ammunition. I think a general like ban of, first of all, like, and this is something that needs to be done on the federal level, because Beto really can't say we're going to ban the at the state level, we're going to ban the production of AR-15s because it's not made in Texas, right? The government just say we're not fucking doing that stuff anymore. And I think ultimately,
sorry not to cut you off, but there is a lot of gun manufacturing that's moved to Texas in the past 10 years.
Right. Fair enough.
Because a lot of that was built in Connecticut for a long time, and a lot of that has moved here recently. But sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm not sure who produced that exact AR-15 that was used in the shooting, for example.
And Canada's put 1,500 type of guns on the list of that. And like, I'm frankly like, to me personally, like I like you, I'm not completely allergic to gun, but I also, Michael says not expend any political capital on this. I'm also not spending any political capital standing in the way of gun control, especially like the level of gun control that we're talking about here, right? Like I'm somebody who like can entertain a philosophical right to like a rifle or a shotgun for like community generalized defense, and even in a like revolution. Like I don't mind that, but like I don't think you should be allowed to produce fucking these guns. And I think we should. And like you said, like I think it's an important point about how easy some of these other guns are to mod. And we also have, I think, I don't know, maybe it's just a fear-mongering issue, but I think like the 3D gun stuff like is going to create a sort of conversation about this stuff. If you do see a mass killing made with something like that, you're gonna be talking about that too. And if you see an assault weapons ban, like Pelosi's talking about, if you actually see something like that happen, those 3D printers are going to start going off the shelves a little bit. And so I do think you just kind of need to say, if you make something like that, and I prefer that to if you buy something like that, but if you make something like that, or you modify something that produces a certain amount of like ballistic. I
Mhm.
don't know how you're going to like quantify it, but ballistic energy per minute, then that's illegal.
Mhm.
And I think that's and I think Michael's point. This is why I do feel ambivalent about that, because I think Michael's point about who is going to get policed in the way that this stuff is generally pursued is completely right, and it's completely predictable. And it's like, okay, like we do the thing for 21-year-olds, moving from 18 to 21, so that theoretically you cut down on school shootings, so that at least maybe that one's out of the news. But like
Mhm.
I think you told me that the median age for mass killers is like 30, so you're still going
Yeah.
to have those ones, but those ones aren't quite as internationally embarrassing as the ones that happen at elementary schools. um, yeah.
No, I mean, when you're talking about this problem, I think it's important to be able to separate a few things, right? Is the focus on stopping these horrors from happening? I think that it should, personally. Um, but you also have to look at like the rate of gun violence and gun deaths in this country. They typically don't happen in that same kind of fashion, right? So, like, if you're trying to target policy, right, you have to think about what the intended goal is, right? Um, I something like, again, as I said, I do support background checks. I do support magazine restrictions. I think that those are limited, but I think those are just so common sense and easy to do. I don't think it will solve the problem, but I do think that if it stops one thing, it's worthwhile, right? Because no one's getting hurt on that. I think coming after manufacturers is really the key here, because one of the things when you talk about buybacks or something like this in this country is just to remember how armed people are in this country. I mean, there are just an unbelievable amount of weapons in the United States of America. And, it's just one of those things it'll be very hard to make those things go away. But what is really fueling the new construction and the new influx of weapons? It's profit. And I mean, it's if you've gone into gun stores, in this country, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not just weapons; it's military style weapons, and they're being sold to you. I mean, I'll just say in my experience, I've bought an ammo at a gun store before, and somebody was trying to, push me on buying hollow point bullets so that it could go through the thick jackets of those guys you see in the city, which you know exactly what he meant by that, right? And that is profiting off of hate and death and destruction. That certainly needs to be checked. But two, it's these huge gun manufacturers that know that they're trying to build this kind of, tactical looking weapon to sell to people. And there's a huge market in that. And I think you really need to start addressing that before you start coming to the people. Um, I do think it's tough because I have reservations on this. That if you really want to stop deaths from guns, domestic violence is like by far in a way like the number one indicator. And if you get a charge for domestic violence, you lose your right to a firearm. I I feel that makes a lot of sense, though I do worry, and I'm just being honest with y'all. These are things that like they're just difficult questions sometimes to work your way through. I have hesitations on that just because I know who gets charged for that and who doesn't. And I just can see, these being a very, very helpful way to again police and harass people who are already over policed and harassed.
I
But
point I point blank think cops are going to be less likely to hand out domestic violence stuff if it impacts people's guns.
you think
Like,
so?
I mean, I don't have confidence in how cops handle domestic violence stuff anyway. But like I mean, they sit on like all sorts of stuff, and if I don't know, like if all of a sudden, I mean, I don't want to like poo poo it. Like I said, like I'm just like
Hmm.
concerned about that. Like, I mean, sure, let's try it. But yeah, like
Yeah.
you said, like I mean, the problem is like the inequities and how and who is going to it's going to be poor and not white. That's going to be the skew, and we just know, and you can predict with certainty that that's going to happen, and it's like that's tough to sign on to.
So I think in the immediate future, like passing some very common sense reforms that are just frankly popular across the entire political spectrum. Really, like it's amazing when you look at the polling versus the legislation on this, even in Texas. You know, limits on magazine clips, background checks, red flag laws, those all work for me. Um, But I also think that the real goal needs to be to start targeting the profit industry behind all of this. Because until you deal with that, you won't deal with the money that's in politics that makes these people do this kind of shit. The thing about constitutional carry here in Texas, which I hate to even use their bullshit term, right? Because it's not constitutional, it's not historical or anything like that. It's a complete new fantasy that they put up. Extremely unpopular, even with gun owners, because people don't want random ass people who, beyond even the word about them being a criminal, just having no fucking idea what it is in their pocket, with them walking around with a handgun, right? That's something that just needs to go away.
Yeah.
We never needed that in this state in our history, and we certainly don't need it right now, right? So there's a lot, I think, that's on the table in Texas in particular that can be done immediately, and where I'll stand, with some people in the Democratic Party saying like, yeah, this makes sense and we should do it. Where I draw the line is I don't want to I don't support a huge gun buyback program. I don't support necessarily hard bans on things. I do support coming after the manufacturers and the production of a lot of these weapons, that there's just too many of them, and that's why they're being used, is because there's so many of them and they're so easy to get relatively to other things.
Yeah, I mean, and so my perspective is influenced by not only like my dad had very close relationship with the game and fish department. He's literally like reviewed certain types of arrow technology to see if it's like fair chase and should be allowed, that sort of thing. So I think like that is a state department that every state's got a game and fish or fish and game or whatever the fuck you call it. And you should, if you are into firearms, you should have a relationship to that like most people like have with the DMV.
Totally,
I think that's like that sort of thing is very important. And like there, like you said, there's a sickness in gun culture. There is, I think, like you could see like something in like the old fashioned outdoorsman type of thing where you got like the sawed off sort of folded over your forearm and the bird dog next to you, and like I that's where I come from. And then you have this other sort of like Blackwater
weekend warrior
types that read all this crazy shit online and buy these weapons and imagine that they're going to be hunting zombies or something. And to those folks, I think like I don't have a whole lot of sympathy because I think like what your participation has been in this debate has been to just stonewall and say we fuck you every time there's a like Newtown, anytime there's kids dead, it's fuck you, this is ours and the Constitution says so. And so guess what, all those folks, you got a lesson in politics. If this goes your way, maybe you can forestall it, but like that's what happens. And that's why like I think our job is to make sure like to the best we can we focus on the wrong people not getting policing. But as far as like taking away people's right to have a gun that shoots like 25 bullets in 30 seconds, like sorry, like it'd be nice if these mass killings weren't happening to piss people off and you could just play with your toys and shoot them. But I don't think you should be able to safely go to rifle ranges. I don't think you should be able to I think all that stuff should be regulated and regularly inspected like a game warden. Like that's on the game warden's job now. It's like checking people's license and going to gun ranges, make sure people don't have military weapons.
And I mean, I think we could go on probably for another hour and a half on this, but I just want to note on that like weekend warrior kind of gun psycho culture, like that comes again out of the marketing and the bottom line for the gun manufacturing industry, and those people. Well, I don't want to make it seem like I have a lot of sympathy for them. Those people are different necessarily from like the problem of active shooters, but those people play cover and a political role in basically allowing and preventing any kind of very basic reform or regulation on firearms in this country, right? So yeah, that does need to be addressed. I think if you focus on the source of why there's a market for that kind of thing, you're going to have much better results than just sort of poking at individuals, because they are immune to that at this point. As Michael said, we can make fun of them, but until you start going after the industry behind it, you're not going to get very far politically.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, that's that's all I got on that. I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could, yeah, again, like we could just go on for a long time because I mean, again, I'll just say like I'm open on a lot of these questions. I'm not particularly open on taking away people's guns writ large. I do believe in gun ownership as a principle, especially for working and poor people, especially when you see the way that police act in this country, both in attacking people and in refusing to defend folks. But again, I'm working through a lot of these things too because I get worried sometimes that when we finally get the political energy to do something, it's going to be the most punitive and misdirected thing.
Of
And
course.
I think that would be a really horrific disaster that after all of this carnage, after all of this horror, that there's just another disaster waiting to happen.
And I agree. And like it just reminds me like, Reconstruction fails. And what does the progressive movement go for? But what is it? The prohibition. It's like, a good alcohol does create problems in society. I mean, and I'm saying like we should regulate guns way worse than we regulate alcohol, but like that sort of thing. Like it's a shame that the state, when we are able to mobilize it, it is in a way that's controlling the people instead of controlling like profit seekers and stuff like that. But.
So maybe we'll do more, and then I'll be curious to hear what people think. And just hearts out to these families. I can't. It's really hard to even think about what they went through, and two fucking big middle fingers to Abbott and Cruz and the rest of that lot who refused to even do the most common sense, basic human thing in these moments.
Yeah.